could more rapidly learn the lessons of life. So several different disciplines were bestowed upon man in ancient times. The first and basic of all these disciplines was purification. This was the great discipline of the ancient Greeks, that the individual, before he can become wise, must purify his life of those corruptions which make wisdom impossible. In other words, purification was not merely washing your hands, nor was it bathing in the sacred tank. Purification was the cleansing of the life. It was the elevation of integrities. It was the proper use of emotional, mental, and physical potentials. Purification was the right to be right. It was the right to use every facility that has been given to us in the most constructive, idealistic manner. Purification was of the body, was accomplished in antiquity by dietetic restrictions, by leaving off certain foods that were not useful, to break away from all things entering the body which are likely to corrupt the body. It was ventilation, it was exercise, it was the gradual putting of the body into the most perfect condition possible, so that there were no naggings from the flesh, that the individual was not constantly beset by pressures which arise primarily in the body. This was the beginning of the life of wisdom, that the individual should build a house according to the law. And if he builds this house of his own flesh according to the law, the living God will dwell therein. Having gone through purifications, moral, ethical, physical, those seeking truth then settled themselves upon a way of wisdom. What do you have to do to learn? How are you going to improve knowledge? The Greeks followed the same system as the Hindus, the Chinese, and practically all other nations. They placed the student seeking to know under the guidance of those better informed than himself. So there were schools of teaching. There were great scholars. There were philosophers. There were mystics. There were the state mysteries, and all of these institutions. Do we obey because they have some mysterious hypnotic influence on us which we cannot resist because we do not understand it? To obey, finally, is to obey the universal plan, to stay in harmony with the will of heaven, to keep the rules which have been given to us and have been set forth in most of the great legal codes of the world. From the oldest time, there were great legal codes by which our conduct was directed. Way back in the time of Hammurabi in Babylonia, there was a rule, there were many rules, but there was one rule that had to do with a man who built a house. The rule had many interesting branches and implications in it, but the substance was this. If a man builds a house badly, and that house falls down, or does not fulfill its purpose properly, the owner, who is the sufferer, has the right to decide what shall happen to the culprit. If he says the culprit should be hanged, there's a possibility that he might be. But most likely the owner would say, I want my house rebuilt and rebuilt correctly. And if the builder refused to do this, he was imprisoned. There was no further doubt. Every transaction must be honorable. And that was the rule 3,000 years ago. That anyone caught adulterating a product, misrepresenting a statement, breaking a promise, this type of thing was punishable by law, quickly, immediately, and without an elaborate defense by some professional lawyers. Either it was done right, or the blame went where it belonged. As a result, we find evidence that the buildings back in those days stayed together rather well, because it was necessary to have that kind of a rule. And it was also in this code all kinds of teachings and moral statutes that code, as it was written 3,000 years ago, was more honorable, more final, more brief and clear than any code we have composed in the last 500 years. The code was intended simply for the purpose of rewarding the righteous and making the unrighteous do it over again. This type of thinking was very basic, and it was based upon a simple principle. This code, the Code of Hammurabi, was not created by Hammurabi. It was created by God and revealed to the great king, probably through his counselors and those who served him. But the final authority, the final power, was rested in heaven. And anyone who broke the laws of men broke the laws of God. Of course, there are laws that have come in now to protect the guilty. They weren't in the Code of Hammurabi. But in substance, those laws which are right and proper originated in revelations, like the Ten Commandments, revelations of sages and prophets. They were the foundation of civilization. And before them, all human beings had to live in a condition of humility. Only the eternal is self-governing. All else must be governed. Only that which is the eternal lawmaker is the master of the universe. And this lawmaker is eternally good and eternally wise, and is the only power that we know that is fully aware of its own purposes. Under such conditions, it is said by Plato that in a republic or a democracy, the best must govern the rest. In the great universal plan of things, the best must govern the rest. And the best is the eternal principle of life itself, manifesting through an immutable pageantry of laws. These laws are the will of the Creator. These laws are the substance of the good life and how man can live it and come in time to the fullness of his own purpose. But before this power that alone knows, all are servants together. All are in bondage to truth, which is a happy state, whereas bondage to error is the most miserable condition that is imaginable. But bondage to truth is to be always termed in the form that the burden is light and the yoke is light. Truth, in serving it, we find not a hard taskmaster, but something that becomes more and more adorable to us, until in the service of truth, or in the service of each other, or in the service of the divine plan, we come to peace, happiness, and security. All these principles are involved in the realization that the laws of nature work, that the laws of nature, as Aesop said, have as their principal vocation the raising up of the lowly and the casting down of the great. Everywhere in nature there is a divine justice, and while generation after generation may pass and not be aware of this justice and believing that they can live in contrary to it, will perpetuate their own selfish and self-centered policies, the final fact remains that there is no mistake that we ever made that we do not have to correct. There is no example of ignorance which must not be transmuted into wisdom. There is no hate that must not be transformed into love. Everything that is negative and dangerous to us arises from our own ignorance and is scattered abroad by the various means of communication that we have today. All that is not true shall be ground down. All that is true shall be lifted up. All that has to do with the future of the world will be worked with. Nature will step in. Strategy and crime and suspicion and all these things will be washed out. They will be finally cleansed by the plan itself. But it may be a long road. It's not something that's going to happen in a moment. But how long it takes depends very largely upon man. Because on this planet, the problems that man suffers from are man-made, and the corrections must likewise be made by man. That which he has done, he must undo. That which he has falsely built up, he must recognize his mistakes and correct his attitudes. Policies that are not good for all are not good for anyone. And all the struggle for power, the struggle to conquer, all this is a delusion. For we are always, and have been always, fighting war after war for possession of this little molehill we call the earth. And when we get it, what do we have? Simply a graveyard. So nature is trying to tell us these things. Nature is trying to make it obvious to us that nature will win. That no power that man can use can corrupt the law upon which existence stands. The individual who says he is breaking a law, really telling us that the law is breaking him. Man can never break any laws except those he made himself. And even some of these perhaps should be broken, others should not. But no man can break the divine law. No one can interfere with the immutable purposes of the infinite plan. These purposes will be fulfilled, and in the fulfillment of them will bring us all in due time to a condition of actual security that cannot be destroyed by political motions. The utopia we hope for can never be conquered or captured by an ambitious despotism. The thing that we are looking for is a world which will cease to realize or believe that in the conquest of others there is greatness. Greatness lies in the conquest of self. And this is something we all have to learn. And when we learn it, we will realize what the mills of the gods are doing. The mills of the gods are making this final achievement of integrities inevitable. They are going to grind away the false values. They are going to grind away that which is destructive. And they probably will grind swords into plowshares one of these days, we hope. But always the plan works. And it's a great faith in this is the greatest strength that man has today to combat the pressures of the world in which he lives. If we are quiet and firm and true within ourselves, we are one with reality. And it is better to be one with reality in a very simple way than to be the ruler of all the nations of the earth. Because no one can really be their ruler. The ruler was there before they came. The ruler has always been there and always will be there. But sometime we will have the wit to realize this, and in so doing start the kind of world we all hope for. Well, time's up, folks. We'll get that there.